Duane and Catherine.
What do you think of this Donald Trump thing? You know, we teach in the States frequently as well, and every time Catherine cautions me to make sure I'm careful about what I say, because you never know.
And every time he ignores me completely.
And it's been a long, interesting time in the last year. I don't think I've ever studied anything to the degree that I've been watching what has been unfolding in the world, and particularly the US with Donald Trump. In fact, I got to make a confession, because we really want to address this whole thing, and it's taken a year for us to sort out what do we want to say about this. Don't want to offend people. And to talk about this, we have to really, we've reflected a lot on ourselves as we're looking at what's happening with Donald Trump. And I have to make a confession. I've been really pissed off. Like, I am really upset. I am obsessed, in fact. There's nothing I do with my time when I'm not lecturing or teaching a workshop or doing 4 Steps with Catherine, where I'm not wanting to get to my TV. What's happening? Has he gone down yet? I'm hoping. Everything happened so quickly, maybe in this last hour, somebody's nailed him. I want him to go down. How many other people feel the same way? Yeah! In fact, I'm really pissed off. Now, that's only part of me. But we have to look at that part of us, because truly, there's a part of me that just wants to react and get down there. I remember when I was in my 20s, I was in England following Watergate. But you didn't have the internet then, you didn't have 24-hour cable news. I had the Herald Tribune newspaper that I would get every 2 days to learn everything I could about, have they got Nixon yet? And that hatred that I have for Donald Trump is part of the reason Donald Trump is there. A lot of us don't know that. It's like I've been watching this crazy Shakespearean tragedy unfold in front of our eyes. And then I realized, well, actually, I'm not in the audience, I'm on the stage watching this thing. But then I realized, actually, I'm part of what wrote this play. And so are you. That Donald Trump, in many ways, is a perfect representative of a whole lot of what's going on for all of us that we're going to talk a whole lot about tonight. We're going to be unraveling the whole psychology of politics and the defense systems and what vulnerability is really all about. And how we are not victims to what's happening, but very, very much part of what's happening.
So we're going to be talking about this as it applies to organizations, as it applies to society, as it applies to families. Each and every one of us has tremendous power and influence, and we're not aware. Each and every one of us has the ability to change what is happening by changing what we're contributing to what is happening. And so we really want to disseminate the nuts and bolts of how that works here tonight, specifically. So I'm going to start by showing you a little picture of a typical organization of some kind. Maybe it's where you work, right? A hierarchical organizational structure. Who is the leader in that picture? It's not a trick. Who's the leader? The person at the top. That's how we think about leadership, right? And when we think about connection and communication, we think about it like this, It's an option. We pick up the phone and chat to somebody underneath us. We organize a meeting to discuss something. We have a conversation on break about vacation plans. Whenever two people meet, there are two levels that are happening at any given point in time. We are delivering the content of our message, which is delivered through, it's strictly the words, that's it. We are delivering the content, and that makes up about 20% of what's happening. And underneath that, we are communicating at a relationship level. And that message actually makes up about 80% of what's happening anytime two people meet. That relationship message is conveyed non-verbally. It's conveyed through tone of voice, it's conveyed through eye contact, it's conveyed through body language. And the reason that we're saying that that is 80% of any given moment of communication is because that always overrides the content. So think about it. When you leave a conversation with somebody, you may or may not remember what is said, but you definitely remember how you felt with that person. And that's particularly impactful when it feels like the relationship message doesn't match the content. We remember how we feel. This is why, if you ever tune in to CNN, which sadly we have on in our living room a lot these days, and the drug ad comes on. The drug ad. It is amazing what happens in these American drug ads. So here we are, there is pictures of smiling, happy faces, nonverbal language that says everything is wonderful. And because we have to give you the information about the drug that we're trying to sell, in a lovely tone of voice we say, and this might kill you. You might die a horrible, painful, tragic death. And drug companies still put these ads together because they still work. Because we pay attention to the relationship message more than we pay attention to the content message. So at this level, connection is not an option. Communication is not an option. Every time you are standing with somebody as you are going on the elevator, you may say hello and smile, or you may just be looking at the numbers. I'm looking at the numbers right now. Whenever you do that, you are sending a relationship message and it has an impact. It is going somewhere. It is not an option to communicate. So an organization might be a hierarchy in terms of how it decides to structure itself in terms of roles, but at that level there isn't a hierarchy. Because we all have equal influence over each other at a relationship level. If your boss has a difficult conversation with you, that boss leaves the conversation as impacted by it as you do. And so at this level, organizations, families, societies kind of naturally organize themselves about who the leaders are on that level, despite what the apparent hierarchy actually looks like, despite what the apparent role around it all looks like. And at this, because anyone can be a leader at that level. Anyone can be a leader, and everyone is a leader at that level. And whenever an organization gets into trouble, it gets into trouble at that relational level. That's where the problems start to happen. And it happens when people stop relating to each other openly and honestly and start trying to position themselves protectively. So literally, it happens when people refuse to be vulnerable. And instead, they get strategic and defended. At that level, all problems that exist in a system, in an organization, are actually relationship problems. And we don't think about it that way. We look at one spot and we say, oh, there's a morale problem. Oh, there's a productivity problem here. If you really start to disseminate what is happening, What there is a relationship problem. How people end up positioning is causing a difficulty in the system as a whole. And people work with a lot more passion, with a lot more efficiency and willingness and enthusiasm if they feel like they're a really important part of a greater whole, where they feel like who they are and what they bring has impact and value. And that is actually part of the problem.
Because the closer we get, the more personal your cause, the more important something or someone is to you, the more you will feel vulnerable and react to that vulnerability in very, very predictable ways. As personal investment increases, whether it's in a primary relationship, a job that your whole life is involved in, volunteer activity, as your personal investment increases in something, so does your vulnerability. Because your investment is something, then you could lose it. And that's scary. So when something is important, we are frightened of losing it, and therefore we get more sensitive to criticism. We get more controlling, we get more reactive, we get more strategic. And leaders everywhere fall into this. And as vulnerability increases then, so does relationship or organizational problems increase in organizations. There's a whole lot of people with a whole lot invested in being part of something together. Whenever something's important, we remember what happened when we were children when something was important, and we don't want that to happen again. So we default to strategy and defense.
Just to give an example around that, how many of you have ever been involved in volunteer organizations in some role, particularly a leadership role? People tend to volunteer because something's important to them. I have never experienced the kind of dysfunction that I have experienced when I get involved in a volunteer organization. I don't know that I have ever had one where I wasn't going in there going, oh my God, is that really what we're doing? The stuff that happens because the cause, whatever it is important.
So we hide, we pretend, we defend, or we offend on that 80%, if not 20% level that's going on all the time. You could be annoyed at somebody, for example, and you're hiding it. But you're emailing back and forth, maybe it's a family member, and normally you say, love Duane, and for some reason you just say Duane. But you know how powerful that can be. That's the relationship message. If the person said, is everything okay? Oh yeah, everything's fine. Talk to you later. We cannot not communicate. Whatever is going on for us in that vulnerability, we think is sort of just on an island by itself. It's just in your head. We cannot not communicate. We're plugged into everybody all the time. It's impacting things profoundly. We don't know that. We think we're just at the receiving end of it. So our own history gets very, very much involved the moment we are investing in someone or something. A whole lot of things come out of the woodwork that determine what happens. For example, what is the middle figure here? Sorry?
You're dealing with
13. B. What is it? 13 or B?
13.
What determines whether it's 13?
Because you said, what's the middle figure?
Figure, yes.
You see?
Oh, she nudged me.
I did.
Does that hint you to a certain answer?
No.
Yes, because a figure is a number.
Oh, I see.
See? Good trick.
All right, before I spoiled
The trick is spoiled.
it, people just love it when you get me. What is the middle symbol? Huh? If it's 13, and it's only 13, for example, if you came from planet numbers and you ran into this, you would say, oh, there you are, 13, I miss you. That's what it would be. It would be 13 because you come from planet numbers. If you come from planet alphabet, it's a B. The context that you carry with you determines the meaning of what's in front of you. If you come from planet fear, guess what you're going to see? As opposed to I come from planet trust or love, you'll see something else. And yet, so what we see in front of us, what we're reacting to all the time, says more about what's going on inside of us than our ability to measure accurately what's going on in front of us. Everybody get that? Really important. Really important to understand. Did I cover it all? Charles Manson and Mother Teresa, for example, walking down through a ghetto in LA. I don't know why they would be doing that together.
But assuming they would.
Just imagine they would, and they're running into the same thing. People on the street doing drugs, crime. What would Mother Teresa see?
Compassion.
She would feel compassion because she'd see people needing help, right? They're human beings, they're in distress, they're in trouble. Her heart would bleed for them, and she would form an organization and raise some money and get some volunteers. And what would Charles Manson see and do?
Followers to recruit.
To recruit, yeah, or take advantage of, or be threatened by. Right, and they're seeing exactly the same thing. A big part of the work we do is getting very, very clear and humbled by our actually inability to perceive beyond the meaning we put on things because of stuff that's happened to us in our life, in our past, that come to bear.
So the question is, where is this vulnerability coming from in us? I said that what gets communicated at a relationship level is emotional. It's emotionally conveyed, right? Through your tone of voice, through your body language. It is an emotional message. And that is where our vulnerability lives as well. I'm going to go through this next bit relatively quickly because in some lectures we spend a long time on it. Because we want to focus on other stuff, we're going to focus
Trump.
on it slightly.
You want to get to Trump?
We do. Some more. This, as soon as we are born, the very first part of us to get wired up after our instinctive reptilian part of our brain at our brainstem is our emotional system. It gets wired up because it facilitates bonding with our caregivers. So we're wired for connection and for feeling before we're wired for thinking and the ability to sort things out. In my mind, that has a spiritual reason for being, not just a psychological one. But whether or not that makes sense to you, it doesn't really matter in terms of how this operates. So whenever something happens, our thinking brain doesn't kick in until somewhere it starts at the age of 5. The first time you have a sequential memory where you can describe A, B, C, D, E happened, that's when your thinking brain is just starting to kick in and your ability to sort things out logically is just beginning. That sucker doesn't get totally wired up until early adulthood, which really explains the teenage years in part. That. So whenever anything happens when we're young, it feels really, as particularly traumatic things, it feels really scary. If it feels like it threatens that connection that we have with the people who are important to us. And when those things happen, because we don't have the ability to sort our way through it, we take on at an emotional level what we call suspicions about ourselves. Oh no, there's something wrong with me. I am not good enough, we think. I'm describing it like it's a thought, but it's a feeling rather than a thought. We feel like we're not enough. I had a couple of other things happen as well. I was one of those kids on the schoolyard that could never quite fit in. I would get in there and then I'd boot it out again. And I also experienced sexual abuse as a child. So those kinds of things all form what we call the basement of our psyches at an emotional level. We start to feel that there is something wrong with who we are. And in the very moment that those things begin, we kind of split off into two personalities. One, we sort of lock away in the basement at an emotional level, and then we go, okay, who I am isn't good enough to be loved. What am I going to have to do to survive and get the love back? We try behavior A, it doesn't work. Behavior B, doesn't work. Behavior C, it works. Bingo. So who I really am isn't lovable, isn't good enough. So I am going to become behavior C. I am going to become strategic. I'm going to adopt this pretend self to hide what I'm really feeling about myself in the basement. And my pretend self that I figured out, these start relatively unsophisticated, but they get really sophisticated as we get into adult years, because we've had lots of practice. The one that I hit on is I am going to learn how to overfunction in relationship. I will back off, I will adapt, I will learn how to do more than my share in relationship. I will just take care of everything. I will take care of it. And the same thing I learned with my friends on the schoolyard. I kind of learned to be a performer and a people pleaser. I will read, who do you want me to be? How am I going to get you to like me? And we do this. We learn, we adopt a strategy.
Which one do you think Donald Trump? This one? This one?
Sometimes.
Pretend?
Sometimes.
But mostly, yeah. You got to wonder, to the degree that all of us are adopting one of these strategic strategies, it's equal to the degree that there's something going on underneath, even for Donald Trump.
And so here we all are, innocently wandering through our lives as adults, and all of a sudden, we're not aware that this is happening, but this is what happens. All of a sudden, it's like there's a knock on the door to the basement. Something will trigger that. And we have a moment of, oh no. Sometimes we don't even know that we feel that. We just instantly react out of our learned strategic behaviors. Oh no, someone in the audience doesn't look like they're entertained and having fun. What do I have to do to make you like me? It happens instantly, just like that. Sometimes before we're even aware of what's getting stirred up.
We spend a whole lifetime making sure we never feel that trigger. We're avoiding those areas that trigger that feeling in the basement. So it triggers it, and thus we want to avoid it at all costs. We spend our whole lifetime trying to organize ourselves to make sure that we avoid that feeling at all costs. We're here to tell you the solution is actually go the other way. And the trouble in the world is because everybody's avoiding what's going on in the basement.
But we're going to tell them that in a couple slides from now.
I'm not really getting it. That's just a little bit of foreshadowing, a little bit. So what are some of those things? Putting yourself out there honestly and authentically, for example, right? In positions of leadership. I don't want to do that. I'm frightened I will be rejected. I think I'll just kind of watch things and be careful. Avoid situations or people that remind you of your past. This is so much unsorted out business, unfinished business from your past. You just want to avoid old friends or having something or someone actually be important. With fear of loss of what's going to happen if you make them important.
I think that one is so common. I can't tell you how many times I have heard people say, well, I just want to not care what they think. I want to not care. Think about what you're saying. You want to not care. That's what we try to do. We try to numb ourselves from the impact of caring, of feeling like somebody is important.
I can't tell you how many clients we have over the years where that, there'll be a couple that's together for 15, 20 years and he has never said, I love you, even though he does. Comes out after she left. He loved her the whole time, but he can't. He won't. He wants to avoid that territory of what it means if I say that. Give you power. If I give you power, you can lead me. So I'm not going to say it. Personal investment of any kind, emotional investment or investment of time or effort. Again, fear of loss. I just want to stay away. A trigger for many is having someone in a position of power over you. Just want to be a truck driver so I never have to deal with anybody. Then nobody's going to have power over me. I'm just going to be alone all the time. Don't have any authority. Stay away from that. Or you're in a position of authority and you are avoiding being in authority and power. A lot of people are really frightened of making a mistake. So they're always avoiding it, always trying to be perfect all the time. I can't make a mistake. So if I make a mistake, that's what's going to show up what's in the basement of my psyche. Taking any kind of personal risk at all. Price tag and all these things are enormous. And bottom line is to avoid that which is unfamiliar or unknown. I mean, look, if we just return to the US for a moment, with everything that's going on, it's such a profound reaction to losing control of what the comfort zone has. I don't know if it ever actually existed where America was apparently great, but such a reaction to ethnic minorities. The comfort zone having to be to stay with people that are white and male, right? That's all that's about, is trying to get to the comfort zone to avoid something. Get back in control, because there's a vulnerability going on in America right now. There's a vulnerability going on everywhere. So how we handle these triggers is key. And what we have learned to do is react with our emotional fear, with our learned strategies, with hide, pretend, and defend. And when we hide, pretend, or defend, all of that is injected into that relationship web that you think isn't impacted by you. And when we hide, pretend, and defend, the relationship web organizes itself around that thought or that fear. If you're prickly and defensive, people will walk on eggshells around you. If you're an overfunctioner, people will underfunction around you. And if you're an overfunctioner, you'll complain, how come everybody's always underfunctioning around me? So what we haven't worked out in our past, we will actually, all those vulnerabilities, folks, from the past are unsorted business. We made up stuff about ourselves in the basement that is not true. And in many ways, it wants to heal itself, and it's going to keep showing up wherever you go. And what we haven't worked out in our past, we will act out by diverting our attention to those triggering us in the present. All those places where we get triggered, the triggers are vulnerability that we brought with us. The triggers didn't cause it. The triggers are triggers. So in the US, with Donald Trump, it's going to be the press, or the FBI, or the CIA, or Hillary, or the judicial system, Mexico, and now even Canada. Right? Whatever is triggering it is the problem. When it actually is just triggering a problem. We have such a long way to go to start taking responsibility for what is triggered. Instead of blaming, pointed everything around us that's just simply firing it off, catalyzing it. Life organizes itself around how you see it through the mechanism of what you put into it. So you're going to be strategic and defensive or real. So, for example, if we just take a look at Donald Trump, as much as I don't really like to, but if he came to my office, I guess I'd have to. And I would. Because here's what I would look for. What is going on? Where did this come from? You know what's underneath that degree of defense? Remember I said earlier, it equals, to the degree that it's defended equals to the degree that there's a suspicion of self underneath. He's an extremely insecure man. He had a relationship with his father who was an autocrat. Putative. Extraordinarily rigid standards of what you have to do to be accepted and approved. And he pontificated a stance of being a killer to succeed in life. What do you think Donald Trump is still trying to do even though his dad is dead? It will never be enough. He can control the whole bloody world, and it's not going to sort out that insecurity that actually is going on inside him. And that's what's driving that bus. He was a bully in grade 1 and 2. He happened to be larger than most of the other kids, but he was already a scared kid. And he already had to make up for what he feared he was by being a bully right from the start. I was doing a little bit of research and just looking into his relationship with his son, Donald Trump Jr., who says most of his life he's been a stranger. But Donald Trump Sr. went to pick up Donald Trump Jr. as a teenager at some school to take him somewhere, and Donald Trump Jr. was with his friends, and they were going to some event that he wanted him to dress up for, but the Jr. came out with a New York Yankees shirt on, obviously not dressed up for a black tie dinner or whatever they were going to. And he just saw him in front of his friends, and he smashed him onto the ground and walked away. A little bit of maybe what happened to him. Let's take a look at another one. Adolf Hitler. I mean, really? What the hell is going on there? When he was in, a lot happened to little Adolf. But I remember coming across, and I had to verify it this morning just to go on, is this true? When I was taking 20th century history in university, I remember coming across this piece of information that one of his kids in his school in grade 3 or 4 was a fellow student named Ludwig Wittgenstein. And Ludwig Wittgenstein was a brilliant, brilliant person. He became a very, very famous 20th century philosopher. He wrote a book called The Blue and Brown Books on meaning. And I mean, I can't read a paragraph without, what on earth did I just read? I have no idea. Like a stunningly clever, brilliant man who apparently completely ridiculed little Adolf in the school ground, and Ludwig was Jewish. Shamed. Put in his place. A lot of people are thinking too, like with this whole Trump becoming the president, that he was ridiculed by Obama at one of those congressional dinners where they roasted and he made fun of him, ridiculed him in front of a whole crowd of people. And so Donald covers all that up with profound accusation and attack, with this whole mantle of making America great again. One of the points we're going to be making here is there's no congruity between the 20% and the 80%. It has to be congruent. You can't make America great again when you're bringing your worst. You can't make America great again when you're bringing your worst. You have to bring your greatness.
So, taking it back to the personal level, the way out of this mess is that we actually have to learn to let ourselves be vulnerable where we are vulnerable, instead of hiding and pretending and defending. Because the choice to do otherwise isn't neutral. Vulnerability, if you think about it, when somebody's legitimately vulnerable in front of you, how do you feel? Good. Compassion. Connected? When someone's legitimately vulnerable, our hearts open. It's a natural human response. And that has tremendous power. In that connection, actually, is the correction for all of the suspicions of self that we hold in the basement. If there is one experience of our awakening workshop, it's that. People don't sometimes know how to be vulnerable. We are very skilled at helping people become vulnerable, but what happens when you are is human and beautiful. When somebody's brave enough to go, this is what I'm really feeling underneath everything. This is who I am. People respond with connection and compassion, and it changes how you feel about yourself in the basement. Every single one of those suspicions that we hold about ourselves was made up with an important other person. It was made up in a connection or a relationship with another human being. None of it happened when you were all by yourself. Period. It didn't. It has to be corrected there for that reason. In the work we do our very best to create a nice, safe place to allow vulnerability to emerge so that we can actually experience what is possible. Mm. Personal and systemic evolution takes place on that point of contact where our real selves finally emerge from the basement and come back into the real world in front of us instead of being down there and hallucinating terror from the past all the time. Vulnerability, we want to teach you how to do it in a workshop because we want you to do it everywhere. Everywhere. Every time we give one of these talks, here's what we get. That's all fine and good, Catherine, but what about the real world? It doesn't work in the real world. No, it doesn't always. And hopefully we'll start alerting you to the consequences that the decision not to has impact as well. It doesn't actually keep you safe. I can give you a guarantee, and it is this. Vulnerability will always work better than defense and strategy. Mm-hmm. That is a guarantee. 100% always.
Yeah, so many people say there's no reason to be vulnerable, or I can only do it in certain places, and as Catherine said, that's not true. The choice to protect ourselves in the basement by hiding, pretending, and defending is not neutral. We've already said this. Did I get ahead of myself when I said that earlier?
Yes.
I did. Is that when you nudged me a little bit?
Yep, that was the little, I poked you on the toe
I
like
see.
that.
I felt that. What you don't work out will impact others and is impacting others. Because when you think about it, for a lot of men in particular, they say, I just don't want to, I'm not interested, it's okay, just leave me alone. I don't want to talk, don't ask me how I feel. They think that's neutral. But it actually isn't, because now there's rules in your relationship about how she or he has to be with you to make sure that you don't feel triggered. They will be walking on eggshells around you to protect you from not dealing with whatever the hell's going on inside of you. So it's not neutral, it's already having an impact.
So our refusal to actually address what's going on in our basement is having an impact, period.
So
I want to be very, very clear about that. It's not some non-impactful choice to not explore that.
And it's such an important point, because we're not just saying this to make you feel better. We're saying this because...
You're probably not feeling all that great right at this very moment.
I don't know. I'm pretty excited about that.
I was a little scoldy right now.
Were you?
Yeah.
better them than me. Well, I'll be a little scoldy though, because I think we have a moral responsibility to take care of the impact that we are having and always have had, and think that we haven't. I remember back in when Osama bin Laden first came to be known, where it was shortly after 9/11, and we were teaching a workshop down in Florida, and everybody was obviously upset. And I asked everybody in the audience to write down on a piece of paper how many times they were upset at somebody that day. Right, a piece of paper, they all wrote down things. I was upset at this, and this person did this to me. I said, bring it all to the front, and we put it in a big pile of paper. And I said, if we open all this up, this will add up to the character of Osama bin Laden. These are all our unspoken, upsetting thoughts and feelings that aren't neutral. They actually have an impact, and eventually they'll have a representative. Donald Trump didn't get to be a president because nobody voted for him. Because there's a whole lot of other people, too, that do not want to be vulnerable, that do not want to deal with whatever's going on inside of them. And they're going to latch on to who are we going to blame for all this.
Brené Brown said, vulnerability is the birthplace of connection and the path to the feeling of worthiness. If it doesn't feel vulnerable, the sharing is probably not constructive. And I want to add and emphasize the second point. We are at our most powerful when our content and relationship messages actually match. This is true for good or bad. So when you're operating out of fear and you're blasting a fearful message, it's a powerful thing. I think this might be why the message of those trying to respond is sometimes not as powerful. Because there's a mix between what is said on the content level and what is actually legitimately felt on a vulnerable level. And here I think specifically, because we're so going into Trump obviously tonight, I think specifically of how after the tape about what he said about women came out publicly, how Hillary Clinton used it versus how Michelle Obama talked about it. Do you remember seeing both of those? What was the difference? Do you remember?
One used it as a weapon, one used it to elevate people.
And yes, Michelle Obama talked about her personal experience and how she felt on the receiving end of words like that. She put her vulnerable self, which you can't sidestep. If you feel it, it's there. So she found a way to speak to it directly and specifically and use it to support and carry her message, instead of being strategic and careful and trying to deliver it in a way that we think is going to have impact. We are at our most powerful when what we say with our words matches our relationship message. And when we're vulnerable, that means owning it and speaking to it in some way. You cannot sidestep it. And if you do, the real message that's going to come through is going to be that quiet, subtle one, that relationship one. And there's no way to have your content and relationship messages match responsibly without letting yourself be vulnerable where you are vulnerable. So, because it is connective, vulnerability is connective, it has a power in terms of influencing the society, the organization around us in a way that strategy never ever will. It actually is the force for evolution here. When you become one person owning your basement, instead of being split into between your pretend person and what is hiding in your basement, when you become one person, your message then becomes one message instead of two messages, and it has impact. The way that all of us feel as adults is not a result of what happens to us as adults. It is more a result of what we bring to each and every situation that we encounter in life. It's who we are in the middle of difficulty that determines what we feel, not the challenge or the difficulty itself. We have no idea how our own reactions in actually create the very thing that we're trying to avoid when we revert to strategy and defense. Each and every one of us at that level is the first cause of our own life experience. We always have been. And this doesn't mean that you have the power to determine what other people say or do, but it absolutely does mean that we all have tremendous power to influence others through the medium of connection and relationship and vulnerability. Difficult things happen in life. That is inevitable. Pain is a part of this life experience. Who we are as we move through the difficulty has more to do with what actually happens than anything else. And it is the determining factor in terms of how we feel, the quality of our life experience. All of us have been inspired by stories about people who kind of rise to greatness out of extremely challenging circumstances, right? They just become themselves. They become their best selves out of the worst of circumstances. When we're hiding behind a mask, that mask kind of operates like a mirror. On one end, projected to the world, is the facade that we want people to see, but on the other end, reflected back, is our self-evaluation, the thing that we think we're hiding. And because that's how it works, when we're busy putting on our mask, it's more like our what we're seeing out there is we're just looking for evidence to prove that self-evaluation. We don't actually see what's out here. And instead, when we're brave enough to take off the masks and ditch the strategy, perception then becomes more like a window. You know how you feel really naked when you're vulnerable? It's because you are. And all of a sudden you see things that you never noticed. And you're aware of things that you weren't aware of a moment ago. It becomes a window into the real world, and new information can enter through that window. When we're brave enough to actually let ourselves be naked in that way.
So we're presenting this list again, the same one we just did about things that you wanted to avoid. This looks familiar, right? The same situations that catalyze the strategic defense system that you have is what we actually have to walk through to be an effective leader. To walk back through means you have to be vulnerable and attach your vulnerable self to re-enter. And I had a thought while you were teaching that last piece, around if we don't show vulnerability and we only have our mask and our defense and our armor, that defense is very much like what it's defending against. It only sees what it's defending against, but it becomes what it's defending against. A part of it, in the same way my anger towards Donald Trump with hatred becomes like Donald Trump. We have to re-enter the area that is difficult to become an effective leader and bring our vulnerability with us. We have to learn how to tolerate that vulnerability. And that's tough, but it's alive. For a lot of us, as our families, we actually enter a territory that the family has abandoned and that you've been trained and told not to ever go there again. And you go there, you're not just bringing yourself there, you're bringing your whole family that is defended against being like that too. We have to risk being real, regardless of the potential outcome. Those stories that Catherine was referring to about people that just in the greatest, most difficult spots were broken in many ways. and had to deal with their vulnerability, and no longer had an outcome of a promise, if I'm this way, maybe I'll get something. We have to do it regardless of outcome. We have to not measure our success by what we get by doing it. We have to measure our success by who we are becoming, regardless of the outcome. It's a wonderful state of freedom when you start getting inspired because you want to be the best person that you could possibly be, period. And dismiss the responsibility of others and things around you in order to make you feel okay. Because who you are is more important than what happens. In many ways, all those things we talked about what you have to do to re-enter, Donald Trump would fail in that rigidity in all those categories. And so would I in my reaction to him. When I really took a look at this when we were writing this up, I started asking myself, what's happening for me? I grew up in this alcoholic home in East Vancouver, where we felt like kind of flawed people. And I used to want to be American. I liked the American dream. I liked the Beach Boy. I like sneakers, White Sox, jeans, and a sweatshirt. Something simple and apparently, I like Leave It to Beaver. I liked Archie comic books. A lot of it's kind of silly, but in some ways it was still emulating some kind of dream about the way life could be. And I actually held America to that. That it was a land not just of opportunity to make a whole bunch of money and become a capitalist successfully. It was actually a place where maybe the people could be free and real. And in many ways, my reaction to Donald Trump is I revisit the kind of experience I used to have with my drunk father once every 2 weeks. With that kind of maniacal, racist, sexist, misogynist, could go on and on, attitude, once every 2 weeks with my dad, now it's every day with Donald Trump. And it's hitting a part of me that is freaked out, like scared. I wanted to have a normal life and I dreamed of it. I'm getting older. Maybe it's not going to happen. I get scared. I get sad. What are we doing to each other? This can't be. I had hope. Barack Obama gave me hope. I was hopeful, tremendously hopeful. I cried the day he gave his inauguration speech. Maybe my home, maybe the home of the world is going to be finally okay for me. It was hitting a place in me that is very, very, very deep and very, very sad. I'm not just looking every day to figure out, waiting for Donald Trump to go down. I'm hoping something good is going to happen. I'm very sad about it all. And that sadness and that heart has to be part of anything I do with Donald Trump. Maybe that's why we waited a year to talk about this. Being, just protesting is not enough. My vulnerability around the values of what I want to stand for have to exceed my passion for getting rid of whoever is interfering with that, like Donald Trump. Focus on who's getting in the way versus focusing on what I want to be and live like. It's not enough just to protest in the 20% and say, screw you, Donald Trump. No, we have to be vulnerable, because if I just say, screw you, Donald Trump, we are feeding Donald Trump. We are a cousin to Donald Trump. We are like Donald Trump, trying to get rid of Donald Trump. And that means learning how to hang on to yourself. Like, who are you in the middle of everything? What is that vulnerable piece? And can you represent it and let it be part of the communication? Am I still on?
You got your example.
Oh yes, and we have 2 film clips that's going to demonstrate this. Now these 2 film clips, the first one is of Jimmy Kimmel, who was on, I don't know if you saw the clip, it was just 2 nights ago. And the second one is of Obama. Jimmy Kimmel, late night talk show host, right? His wife just gave birth to a child 3 days earlier. So he comes on the show and he announces that they have this 3-day-old child. And everybody claps. And then he starts crying. He says, but we almost lost her. Him, sorry. And he goes on to tell the story about he was born, everything went fine. And all of a sudden, a nurse spotted that the child was turning purple. The infant was turning purple. And he went on to tell the story about, thank God I was in a hospital where they had a real brilliant surgeon, doctor, who knew how to deal with this. And thank God I had the money that I could afford to pay for his services because he knew exactly what to do, and his son almost died. He almost died, and he had a heart disease. A hole in his heart. And they had to go in there and do surgery on a child that's just born. And he was just crying about what he was going through. And in a way, that would have been enough. I mean, that was hard. He's a comedian doing his monologue, and he's crying, talking about the potential loss of his son and what they went through. Now he felt for his wife and all of it. That was touching enough. But he didn't stop. He didn't stop. He went on to do this.
And I want to say one other thing. President Trump last month proposed a $6 billion cut in funding to the National Institute of Health. And thank God our congressman made a deal last night to not go along with that. They actually increased funding by $2 billion. And I applaud them for doing that. Because more than 40% of the people who would have been affected by those cuts to the National Institute of Health are children, and it would have a major impact on a lot of great places, including Children's Hospital in Los Angeles, which is so unbelievably sad to me. We were brought up to believe that we live in the greatest country in the world, but until a few years ago, millions and millions of us had no access to health insurance at all. You know, before 2014, if you were born with congenital heart disease like my son was, there was a good chance you'd never be able to get health insurance because you had a pre-existing condition. You were born with a pre-existing condition. If your parents didn't have medical insurance, you might not live long enough to even get denied because of a pre-existing condition. If your baby is going to die, and it doesn't have to, it shouldn't matter how much money you make. I think that's something that, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or something else, we all agree on that, right? I mean, we do. And I think whatever your party, whatever you believe, whatever you support, we need to make sure that the people who are supposed to represent us, the people who are meeting about this right now in Washington, understand that very clearly. Let's stop with the nonsense. This isn't football. There are no teams. We are the team. It's the United States. Don't let their partisan squabbles divide us on something every decent person wants. We need to take care of each other. I saw a lot of families there, and no parent should ever have to decide if they can afford to save their child's life. It just shouldn't happen. Not here. So, anyway, thank you for listening. I promise I'm not going to cry for the rest of the show. Please say a prayer for or send positive thoughts to the families with children who are still in the hospital now because they need it. And thanks. We have a special show tonight. We'll be right back with Dr. Ross.
Our unalienable right to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness, those rights were stripped from college kids in Blacksburg. in Santa Barbara, and from high schoolers at Columbine, and from first graders in Newtown. First graders. And from every family who never imagined that their loved one would be taken from our lives by a bullet from a gun. Every time I think about those kids, it gets me mad. And by the way, it happens on the streets of Chicago every day. So, all of us need to demand a Congress brave enough to stand up to the gun lobby's lies. All of us need to stand up and protect its citizens. All of us need to demand governors and legislators and businesses do their part to make our communities safer. We need the wide majority of responsible gun owners who grieve with us every time this happens and feel like your views are not being properly represented to join with us to demand something better.
Einstein said you cannot solve a problem with the same level of consciousness that created that problem. We have really been trying to impress upon you that connection isn't an option. Humanity is connected, whether we like to be or not, and what we each put into the mix affects the whole. Carl Jung used this metaphor of the rhizome plant. That's that picture up there on the slide. The rhizome plant has many apparently different plants sprouting through the surface of the ground that seem like they're separate and individual, but below the surface, they're all connected by a common root system. So it's actually one plant, even though it appears to be many. That's how human beings are. Even I am connected to Donald Trump via my root system in this metaphor. The world is really becoming a smaller place in our experience of it because we're connected instantly via our communications and internet networks. After the election of Trump, Stephen Hawking wrote a great piece about the whole dynamic at a global level, in which he pointed out that there are more people on the planet that own cell phones than have access to clean drinking water. Think about that for a moment. It's staggering. More people on the planet own cell phones than have access to clean drinking water. Through their cell phones, people all over the world are looking at the media representation of our lifestyle here in the Western world, and they quite understandably want a little bit of that too. Many of those people, particularly those living in war-torn countries, are willing to risk their very lives on the possibility. The reality is that in the Western world, even if you are at the lower end of the income strata of our society, you're still among the wealthiest on the whole planet. At the same time, we over here in the Western world, for lack of a better way to describe it, we are also exposed to the same media. And we are seeing how the people at the upper end of the spectrum live. We are seeing that, and we are wanting a little piece of that too. And we get scared. We see this influx of immigration. We see our world's changing, and we get scared of losing the little that we think we apparently have. I think that's part of why it's becoming so protectionist. Why there's this sort of divide between protectionism and reaching out on a global level, more of a world consciousness. And all of us have to decide which way we're going here, whether we're going to continue to see ourselves as separate or embrace the reality that we're connected, to let our consciousness come to that level We aren't separate. Pursuing our individual goals in life is never going to lead to happiness because we aren't just individuals. We are always in relationship. Everything we do impacts others because we are connected and ultimately one. We are never going to find happiness by pursuing those individual goals with the endless artillery of defense, strategy, control, judgment, winning at the expense of somebody else's loss. It will never be true that happiness would come in that manner. Happiness can't come by attacking another human being any more than good health is going to come by removing a limb where there's pain. The state of the world is a result of what we're each putting into it. As we said at the very outset, the ingredients that we each put into the collective mix determines the nature of the cake our human family takes out of the oven. What you put into the system can and does have a profound impact, positive or negative, no matter how small the action. There are no moments that don't count. There are no moments that don't matter. There are no moments that don't contribute to the quality of both your personal day or the world's current state. The impact of that realization is staggering. To me, to both of us, it means that we no longer have the luxury of lingering over the decision to take emotional responsibility. Love, compassion, these can no longer be an accidental state that just kind of occur out of the blue. We actually have to take responsibility and cultivate it and choose to be directed by it, especially in situations where it's difficult. Thank you for your time and attention.